Part 2. President Donald Trump defies deep state in front of the world with Ray McGovern. Subscribe to Dialogue Works. Ray McGovern on the failed assassination of Donald Trump.
Security. That's another bureaucratic indignity as a result of 9/11. Here's what Biden said to refresh memories. Let the FBI do their job with a thorough, swift investigation. Thorough, swift investigations are not what the FBI does in such delicate circumstances. So unless somebody comes in, unless the people directly involved fess up, which two of them have already done. I mentioned the shooter that was denied permission to take out the assassin for 3 minutes before they were shot, and then they said, "Oh, okay, now you can blow his head off," and he did. Okay, but I didn't mention the Trump supporter, red hair, just beside himself because he and others had seen the sniper go up on the rooftop there with a rifle, okay, or some sort of rifle type gun, and kept telling the local police and the Secret Service that was milling all around there, and nothing happened. That was long before he took the shot. So maybe people feel strongly enough about this to speak up and to say, well, there are deep state involvement here, and again, what Biden is capable of doing, and what, in my view, he should have done immediately, was to put at least all these people on administrative leave, from the director of national Homeland Security right down through the director of the Secret Service, down through all these layers that were responsible for the terrible deficiency in the Secret Service operation there in Pennsylvania. But he's not going to do that. And so we're going to be left wondering what happened until the election. And then maybe Trump will have the courage to reveal what happened, and maybe he won't. Now, why do I say maybe he won't? Trump didn't realize what he was getting into when he came into town in early 2017. They tried to make it clear to him, okay? Who was it? Oh, yeah, it was Chuck Schumer, the senator, okay? Now, he called Rachel Maddow and said, Rachel, I got some explosive material for you. I'd like to be on your show. And so on the 2nd of January, Rachel Maddow welcomes Chuck Schumer. Said, "Oh, Chuck, now you said you wanted to tell me something important." He said, "Yes, Rachel. I thought Trump was a smart businessman, but he's done something really stupid." "Oh, what would that be, Chuck?" "Well, he's taken on the intelligence community. He's been criticizing them and disparaging them. He doesn't seem to know that they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back at him." So originally I thought he was a pretty smart guy. He's really, really, really not smart to take on the intelligence community. And Rachel says, "Oh, Chuck," instead of saying, "Chuck, do you mean that the intelligence community can do something against President Trump?" Of course they can. And they did. Now, Trump is just a real estate guy from New York. He's come to Washington. Oh, I'm in charge now, but he wasn't in charge. And there are lots of evidence of that, but one that really sticks out, having to do with assassinations. When by congressional law, the remainder of the JFK documents on JFK's assassination were by law due to be released. Again, probably somewhat naively, Trump gets up in the morning and says, "Okay, today's the day by law that we have to release the rest of the documents involving what the CIA and the FBI has been keeping secret. So I'm going to do that." Next thing you know, Trump gets up again, and he says this precisely. The FBI and the CIA have told me that it's too delicate, that I can't release those documents just yet. So we're going to postpone it for 6 months, and we'll face that situation again in 6 months. Well, what happens? Well, McGovern makes this little note on this to check what happens in 6 months. Nothing happens in 6 months. Now, a good friend of mine, Judge Andrew Napolitano, has made public that he urged President Trump, with whom he was at that point pretty close. There was some prospect that the judge might be elected or selected for the Supreme Court. He had a conversation with Trump shortly before Trump left office, and he said, "Look, you made one promise that I want to remind you of. You said you would release all those documents having to do with JFK assassination, and according to Judge Napolitano, and of course he's a firsthand, he's on the other side of the phone. The president said, "Oh, I can't really do that. Sometime, Judge, when not 15 other people aren't listening in, I'll tell you what I saw. What I saw was horrible, too horrible to release." Now, so what does that tell you? That tells you that there's somebody else in charge of such things in our country, and that's just one example of why it is that if you leave it up for the FBI and the Department of just us to investigate what happened there in Pennsylvania, you're not going to get much insight, much unbiased conclusions. So maybe I'll stop there. I'm sorry to carry on so long.
Ray, what are the similarities between today and the day that we had the assassination of JFK? And do you see any sort of similarity between today and that day?
Well, incentive, or the whole business about why people do these things. The incentive was in the case of JFK, he was being soft on communism. He had already issued 2 national security directives to pull troops out of Vietnam. And in the view of the military, oh my God, leaving Southeast Asia to the commies, to the Chinese or the Soviets or whatever, okay? He had done other things that the military really didn't like. And, Cuba was one thing, When the CIA ginned up this operation called the Bay of Pigs, trained all these Cuban refugees in Florida or elsewhere, and were ready to do this invasion to depose Fidel Castro. 1961, was it? Okay, around that time. Before Kennedy came, well, when Kennedy came in, the plan was already devised. Kennedy said, "Did Eisenhower approve this?" "Yes, sir, he approved it. And besides, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. President, as soon as we land on the beach, there's going to be an uprising. People are really hating Fidel Castro. The government's going to fall, and we'll be rid of these communists 90 miles off our shore." Right? And Kennedy was a pretty smart guy. He looked at these people, and he's looking at the head of the CIA and the deputy director for plans, operations at that time. And he's saying, "Look, I don't think this is a really good idea, but if Eisenhower approved it, I'll go along with it. But just realize one important thing, okay? And that thing is that I'm not going to commit our U.S. Armed Forces, Navy, Marines, Army, or Air Force to rescuing these emigres if they run into trouble and the invasion and the fall of the government doesn't happen, okay? So I'm not going to do that. You got that straight?" Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. Now, you know what happened. They got bogged down on the beach. Castro came in personally and with great, great support, did them in. Okay. Now, after that, uh, Kennedy said, "My God, the CIA, they lied to me. Uh, they wanted to do this operation to get rid of this commie, and they told me that Castro was so unpopular that there would be an insurrection and he'd fall right to the bottom." So Kennedy had an advisor, a historian named Arthur Schlesinger. And he said, "Arthur, look, would you look into this and find out how this came about that they deceived me so much?" And Schlesinger did, and we have his memo. And in the operative paragraph, he says, "Mr. President, the operations people in the CIA who wanted to do this and did do it, despite your admonition that U.S. forces could not be introduced, they never checked with the analysts in the CIA, with the people of substantive knowledge who would have been able to tell you this is a cockamamie scheme. Castro is extremely popular. You can't do diddly with just that number of people on the beach of the Bay of Pigs. They would have told you that," says Arthur Schlesinger, but they weren't consulted. Wow. Okay. That's when Kennedy says, "I'm going to take the CIA and tear it up in 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds." Unfortunately, a neighbor of his told the press, and of course, Allen Dulles, head of the CIA, and I said, "Oh my God, this guy's serious. I guess maybe we're in trouble. What are we going to do?" Besides that, when Allen Dulles, who was head of the CIA at the time, when he died, on his desk was a little coffee-stained piece of paper. And what it said about the Bay of Pigs was, when push comes to shove, President Kennedy will realize that we cannot let this enterprise not succeed. We cannot let failure enter, and he will be forced to commit U.S. armed forces at that point. Whoa. So it was a deliberate deception. What they didn't anticipate was that Kennedy would stand up to them and say, "Look, I told you, no U.S. forces. It's no U.S. forces." But they get killed on the beach. No U.S. forces. You got that? Okay. So what does Allen Dulles and those generals that very much wanted to do this, and part of the FBI and the Secret Service, what do? Well, read James Douglas's book. It has chapter and verse. It's, what's it called? JFK and the Unspeakable. It's about 10 years, 12 years old now. And just read it and see if it all comes together. This long narrative here is meant to show that this is the way it went down. The deep state never even conceived that a president would stand up to them, but JFK did. And what happened? They got him. It's very clear. You can look at the forensics, you can look at the pictures of his brain, you can look at where the shots came from. And the Warren Commission, of course, was appointed.
The following content may contain graphic or violent imagery. I wish to proceed.
This version tracks the limousine and maintains President Kennedy and Governor Connally at center frame. This version is only in slow motion.
why they blew his brains out. And let's just pray this doesn't happen to President Donald Trump. Goodness gracious.
Warren, a steadfast patriot, but who did he pick to run the commission? There's a fellow named Alan Dulles. God. So who picked the witnesses? Alan Dulles. Who knew which chapter or verse to look at? And so that's why the Warren Commission came out the way it did. One last thing, I just tell you, when JFK was assassinated, 22nd of November, 1963, I was in Washington at the time, having been pretty
This
much
version
recruited
tracks the limousine and main.
when JFK said, I was a senior in college. Don't ask what your country could do for you, but what you might be able to do for your country. Now, Nima, that didn't sound corny in those days, okay? I had majored in Russian. After my army service, I went and worked for the CI because I thought I could help that way and was able to do that, okay? So when I heard that speech as a senior in college, don't ask what you could do for you. Don't ask what your country could do for you. Not only I, but many of us came down. Some of us were in my junior officer trainee class, okay? We were serious about trying to make sure that we combated this Russian threat, this Soviet threat, but there were also sensible and good analysts, okay? So as we watched what happened, actually, I was just brand new in the job in June, actually. I came in April of 1963, the same year that JFK was killed. On June 10th, he made this incredible speech at American University in which he said, look, we're all human here. We got to realize that we want what's best for our children. We have different ideologies, Russian, Soviet, but let's find ways to get together. I'm going to stop testing nuclear weapons above board, above land. Partial test ban treaty, as a token of my wish to develop better relations. And last but not least, the worst thing we could possibly do is to confront another nuclear power with a choice between retreat and using nuclear weapons. Now, I mention that because it has contemporary relevance. What we have done to Russia is confront them with a choice between retreating on Ukraine or using nuclear weapons, but they're not going to retreat on Ukraine because they're winning. How about the other way around? The Russians have ipso facto threatened the United States by saying we're exercising these small nuclear weapons now, and if you do something untoward to prevent your defeat in Ukraine, well, so in other words, for the first time in history, really, the first time at least since the June 10 American University speech by President Kennedy, there is a situation where one nuclear power is threatening the other nuclear power with an unenviable choice between retreat and using nuclear weapons. So let me just finish here by saying that when I heard the June speech, I thought, wow, we might be able to deal. Meanwhile, we keep our powder dry and keep our foreign policy analysis sharp. But then, let me just for a second say, yeah, okay, I'm back on here. Okay, so then when President Kennedy was killed in November 22nd, 1963, we were all, of course, aghast at what had happened. And, you know, it was beyond our ken to think that anybody might have been involved, particularly people working in the same building as I was on the other side of those turnstiles, separating the operations people from the analysts. But that's what was entering into. Let me just one more thing. This Nima. Yeah. So it never occurred to us that some colleagues of ours might have been partly responsible. So when the funeral took place, it was really kind of a real downer for us. And then, lo and behold, 1 month after the assassination took place on the 22nd of November. Okay. So on the 22nd of December, President Truman wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post. And what did the op-ed say? It said, we have to make sure we rein in the CIA. It has been doing some things for which it was never intended, okay? Sometimes it will trick a president into doing things that are highly unwise. Read the Bay of Pigs, okay? It was an indictment. It was exactly 1 month after the assassination, and there it is, right in the Washington Post. But not for long. In those days, there were 2 or 3 editions of the Washington Post. I was living there. I'd get one. The home edition, and then anyhow, it disappeared from the later editions. It was not picked up by any media. The only other newspaper that produced it was the Independence, whatever it was out there in Missouri, where Truman had gone to, of course, where he lived. So what does that tell you? Well, that tells you that the deep state really has the Washington Post, New York Times, and the rest of them, even as early as 1963, well in check, okay? Now, still, Alan Dulles thought that was a bombshell, and he wanted to do something to divert attention from that. So what did he do? He made up a pretext to go make a speech in Kansas City, Missouri, okay? So he gives a speech, and then he calls up President Truman. I'd like to come see you, President Truman, former President Truman. And Truman says, all right, okay. So he comes to see Truman, and they talk about all this stuff. And he says to Truman, you didn't really mean what you said in that op-ed there on December 22nd, 1963, did you? Truman said, of course I did. My intelligence advisor, Admiral Sowers, is right there with me. We composed that thing ourselves. We meant every word of it. Well, what happens after that? Alan Dulles, not getting the answer that he wanted, fabricates an answer, dictates a memcon, so a memorandum of conversation, to one of his earliest lieutenants there at the CIA. I'll remember his name as the second. He was a chief lawyer, general counsel, and he said, look, Truman has disavowed that op-ed. Larry Houston is the fellow's name. He worked for the CIA for the first 35 years, okay, from its inception. I knew of him. So Larry, this is what President Truman said. He said, no, that was not what I really meant, and I disavowed all that stuff, okay? So what's the purpose of that? Well, you put that in the files, right? You put that in the records, and when Truman dies, you know, you're living pretty, right? That was the purpose of all that. A month after that, after Dulles dictated this memcon, Truman gives a interview to Look magazine. Okay, Look magazine said, "My God, that was a really eye-opening op-ed you had in the Washington Post. You still believe that?" Truman said, "Of course I believe it, and it's very important." the CIA has to be reined in. So you don't need anything more to show how duplicitous these guys were. And of course, Truman knew firsthand. And that's another part of this story about how the deep state was already pretty much in control back there in '63. I didn't know that. I was a simple analyst watching Russian relations with China and Vietnam. I was able to do my job, but I never knew what was going on the other side of those turnstiles. And naive, callow youth that I was, it never occurred to me that this kind of stuff, this kind of abomination might be going on there. So in answer to any question, yes, I'm convinced that the CIA, parts of the military, parts of the FBI, Hoover knew about it for sure, parts of the Secret Service, and I dare say Lyndon Johnson was at least in part aware of these plans. I don't think Johnson knew chapter and verse, but he certainly knew things and acted on them that appear in James Douglas's book and show the power of the deep state. So you come down there to Trump, and he naively says, "Oh my God, congressional legislation requires that I release the rest of these files," and he announced he's going to do it, and then he's pulled back and said, "Oh, no, I can't do it because," and he says this because the FBI and the CIA said, no, it's still too sensitive. Now, how many years is that? I mean, are there still people alive who are guilty? I suppose there are a couple of us, but that just shows the strength of this. And the FBI is going to do I'm sure it's going to do what the president said, a thorough and swift investigation of what happened in Pennsylvania a day or two ago. I'm sure they're going to do that. I make a joke. It's a sick joke. They're not going to do that. And it's going to take probably a long time, unless fearless people like that fellow that finally blew the head off of the sniper, and unless the red-headed fellow who saw the sniper coming up with the rifle, and unless they're able to get into the media, and unless the media, maybe the alternative media, can rise to the occasion and tell the American people thing that the Washington Post and the New York Times were able to hide in 1963, hide in 2015, 2016, 2017, hide in 2020, and hide in 2020 when the New York Post, which had Hunter's laptop, okay?
Smartest man I know. I mean, for the pure intellectual capacity. He's a grown man. He is the smartest man I know. I mean, for the pure.
They were banned from Twitter. They were banned from anywhere, and you got
Intellectual capacity.
Deep state wanted to tell you, and you got this last thing here. When I talk about people who are vulnerable, if Trump comes in as president, I often mention Jacob Sullivan was the author of Russiagate, including the hacking, so-called Russian hacking, okay? Now, how about Blinken? What they got on Blinken? Well, in the fall of 2020, Blinken called this fellow, Mikey Morrell. I never knew him. Young fella. He was acting director of the CIA. He wanted to be director, so much so that he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times when Hillary was running, and he said, I used to run the New York. I used to Freudian slip. I used to run the CIA and I'm voting for Hillary Clinton. Okay. Guess what? She lost. Okay. So that's Mikey Morrell. So what happens is Tony Blinken calls Mikey Morrell. You said, Mikey, we got a problem with Hunter Biden's laptop, for God's sake. It's that's, my God, we have to discredit it. Now we've already prevailed on Twitter and these other sources to squelch it, but my God, there's a debate coming up, the last one between Biden and Trump, and just 10 days away. You know what we need? Do you think that you could, Mikey, round up some intelligence gurus, people who have served in the past, and maybe they could say that this was a Russian disinformation operation? How about that? Mikey Merrill says, no problem. A few days later, Mike Morrell calls Tony Blinken. No problem. I got them all lined up. I got 50 of them, 50. 4 of them were former heads of the CIA. We got deputy heads. We got the whole 9 yards. And they're willing to say that this was a Russian intelligence disinformation operation. How about that, Tony? Let it roll. Politico, next day, publishes this 51. Now, he got 50. Mikey Morrell added this himself, right? So there's 51, right? Intelligence operatives say this was a Russian intelligence disinformation operation. Wow. Okay. The New York Post comment, nobody's able to comment. This was from Olympus, right? So what happens? A few days later, I forget, 5 or 6 days later, the last debate. Now here's Trump. Still naive, for God's sake, still not accustomed to the ways of the deep state or of Washington. And he makes the big mistake of saying, what about Hunter's laptop? What about that? All those, taking bribes from the Chinese and Ukraine. What about that? And Biden, primed as he was, says, Mr. Trump, haven't you heard that 51 former intelligence directors, 4 from the CIA, have said that was a Russian intelligence disinformation operation? For God's sake, Mr. Trump, don't you know that? And Trump was, yeah. If you need any more evidence of duplicity on the part of the FBI or the people who are now in power, Blinken was the author of this canard, okay? Mikey Morrell is just doing what Blinken told him to do. Didn't have to do it, of course, but that's the way these things work. And you got Sullivan with Russiagate. Now, the reason I mention all that is these are the 2 guys that are going to be very vulnerable if Trump comes in as president. So what are they likely to do? It scares the hell out of me. False flag attack? What would they do? Try to get Russia to start a war with us, or false flag attack of some kind? Would they try to use a mini nuke to make sure Russia knew we meant business, right? And that we didn't lose Ukraine before the election? My God, I hate to hear myself saying this, but I would not put that past these guys. They're young enough to worry about their future, and they're guilty as sin. Okay, Trump has the goods on them, so that's why this is all very, very relevant, and why I think you would have lots of motive on the part of the powers that be to make sure that this very popular with a major segment of our population candidate is done in. So I leave it to your imagination.
Take a look at what happened.
think that's the charitable explanation. I think there are so many signs of deep state involvement that should be looked into. And my God, is there any independent? Is there any group of people with a decent reputation in our country able to look into this country besides the FBI and the Justice Department? I dare say that's a conundrum. I don't know if there are. Take presidents of university. Well, look how they've been to moneyed and the Israel lobby and all that kind of stuff. So we're in a hell of a fix here, and the next 4 months are going to show what kind of country we are. And if we citizens don't A, become aware of this kind of thing going on, and B, spread the word so that we vote for a sensible alternative. I don't know what that would be. I guess I'll end that there before I run out of things to say, sensible or not so sensible.
Ray, in your opinion, just to wrap up this session, if Trump wins, is he going to release those documents related to the assassination of Kennedy?
I'm sorry, what was your question?
My question is this: if Trump wins, is he going to release those documents related to the assassination of Kennedy?
This assumes that Trump survives long enough to win, and it assumes that he has the kind of grit and bravery that clearly he lacked the first time around. Now, when they say deep state or security state, the deep means deep, and Trump will be equally sensitive to his own parlous state. I don't know what he'll do, but he has a chance now to do that. And whether he'd have enough support, enough honest people. I mean, the Congress itself is cowed by these people. It's really problematical if he becomes president, and I'm not advocating for that. I hold no brief for former President Trump. I hope he'd have the courage to do that. If the Democrats become president, whether it's Biden or someone else, then I think the deep state has won another round of this. And that's why I think, just to wind this thing up, that the motive should be looked at, the opportunity should be looked at, and with the Republican National Committee starting its convention today, tomorrow, well, the timing also should be looked at. And I hate to hear myself saying this, but that's where I come at this. And name a last thing here. I have no intention to commit suicide. I'm really careful what I eat and where I go. So if I disappear from the scene here next time you ask me, would you look into it, please? And maybe some of your people would look into it as well.
You can see Donald Trump with his ear doctored. Donald Trump at the Republican convention.
And I had to start again. Just my children and my wife. Thank my lucky stars to be living here today. 'Cause the
Man's lucky to be alive.
freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free.
He's tough. He's tough.
The men who died, who gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. Sing it! God bless the USA. as the next President of the United States. He is here tonight to show his courage, his defiance against somebody who tried to kill him. You will not take this man down. He has the courage, the strength, and he will be the next President of the United States.
I tell you, I think the world needs
From
this
the
man.
lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea.
Millimeters away from
Ladies
being
and gentlemen,
assassinated.
the 45th President of the United States and soon to be the 47th President of the United States, please welcome Donald J. Trump. Oh, and I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm
They vandalized him.
and I won't forget the men
They
who
tried to
died.
assassinate him.
That right to me, and I gladly stand up next to you and defend her
We
still
really
today.
need to pray for this man. They're going to probably try and kill him again.
This land, God bless
I mean, this is a world issue. This just isn't the USA. These people are our strongest allies here in Australia.
and I'm proud to be an American.
Pray for America.
I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. Mr. President.
And that's the end of this presentation, viewers. I hope you enjoyed this two-part series. Again, if you haven't already, I think it's fair to ask you to subscribe to this channel, Dialogue Works. I'm Reverend Dr. J.W. Morrison, Theologist, Central Coast, New South Wales, Australia. Bye for now.